coming. So my name's, I'm Associate Professor Ben Neville. I'm one of the Deputy Directors at Melbourne Climate Futures. I do want to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and in the spirit of corporate sustainability recognise that often Indigenous issues come under the purview of the corporate sustainability team. So very excited today to present to you Susan Mizrahi. And so Susan has been a corporate leader for some time. I think it's very helpful for us to have an inside look at what actually goes on inside corporations, given how important the contribution and the transformation of corporations is to responding to climate change. So we will be getting some insights into the sorts of conversations that go on at the C-suite level, at the board level, within corporations. So Susan is, we're very pleased that she's an honorary fellow of Melbourne Climate Futures, but she's a senior sustainability strategist with some 25 years experience working in Australia and across the world on international business sustainability and human rights issues. She was one of the very first chief sustainability officers in Australia. And I'll just read what she has in her LinkedIn bio here. She has a proven track record of creating and measuring environmental and social impact, enhancing brand reputation through sustainability, transparency, and driving transformative change. So she spent 8 years heading up sustainability at Australia Post, with the last 4 years taking on that chief sustainability role, or the head role moving into a chief sustainability role. She has also been more than once been listed as a sustainability thought leader, including being featured as in sustainability top 100 lists globally. I remember seeing, was it Sustainability magazine? I think I saw you listed in that one. She's held several industry leadership roles, including currently as a non-executive director of the UN Global Compact Network Australia, chair of the Australian Retailers Association Sustainability Advisory Committee, and chair of the London Benchmarking Group Australia and New Zealand, which is now known as Business for Societal Impact. So Susan, very happy to have you here and to hear your thoughts and insights on what goes on inside corporations. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really thrilled to be here and appreciate the invitation, both to speak today, but also to be a fellow with Melbourne Climate Futures. I too would like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people, and like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. In the coming hour or so, I'd really like to make some opening remarks, but to have a conversation with you all. This is not a lecture, but I have sort of some points that I'd like to convey. So in the spirit of a dialogue, please think about some questions and areas that you might want to prod in.
So we'll also then have to collect questions from online.
I should feel those, yeah.
Okay, cool. Easy. And also I just wanted to preface, when I use the term sustainability, I'm referring to sustainability holistically, meaning the environmental, social and governance perspectives, not solely the environmental. The other thing I'd say from a definitional perspective is that I view sustainability as a spectrum. So, or corporate sustainability is a spectrum. So at one end, you've got risk and compliance. And as you travel along the journey to the other end, it's about stakeholder engagement, more transparency. And at the far end, it's around value creation. Some people call that creating shared value. I just prefer to call it value creation. So when I talk about sustainability or how a company should engage in sustainability, I mean...
Sorry, that's my fault.
You only need to hear one of me, not 20. The dimensions holistically and the ESG dimensions. Ben gave you a bit of an introduction about myself. and it is available on LinkedIn. But I'd sort of just start also with some opening reflections on my career, which is that it's sort of, I look back now, it's been 25 years or so far. It's really been divided into 3 phases. The first part of my career was in communication strategy, ministerial speech writing and event management, media relations for the state government. Please, we're just getting started. Welcome. The second phase of my career was really around human rights advocacy. I took my comms and strategy background and applied it to human rights issues that I was really I hate the word passionate, but passionate about. So I worked on the China-Tibet issue for many years, and then expanded to work on other human rights issues, specifically human trafficking and child labour, which everyone now calls modern slavery today. And then the third phase of my career was really taking those 2 sort of different disciplines and my experience in those areas and applying it to working with companies so that they can operate more sustainably, both environmentally and socially, and also from the governance lens too. So that's the 3 facets of my background. I would say also that I'm really, I think that the world's issues that we're facing environmentally and socially and otherwise are so significant and massive. They do require specialist expertise, but they're not going to be solved by any one specialist in any discipline. And so the area of the active cross-pollination of disciplines is very important to me, and something that I think society needs to deliberately engage in, and we as individuals need to start that. And so I've been very deliberate about working in the non-profit space, working in the for-profit space, as a consultant, working with governments, and also now with the honorary fellowship with the Melbourne Climate Futures. I really love engaging with academia on sustainability issues, and I think having that dialogue is really critical across all those disciplines. So that's a bit about myself. Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about the role and the status of the Chief Sustainability Officer, some trends that I'm observing in relation to corporate sustainability from my direct experience, but from my engagement with peers both here and globally, and some ideas for accelerating transformative change, because for me, sustainability is about transformation. It's not about a tick the box exercise or compliance alone. So first of all, just by way of background, the first Chief Sustainability Officer, as I understand it globally, was appointed in the US more than 20 years ago, and her name was Linda Fisher. And she worked at the chemicals company DuPont. Since that time, we've seen more Chief Sustainability Officer roles prop up in corporations around the world. Again, I think most of them have been out of the US originally, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say that the US have been leading in all aspects of sustainability from the outset. The role of a Chief Sustainability Officer is very broad-ranging. As I touched on at the beginning, my definition for sustainability or corporate sustainability covers the ES and G. So as a sustainability manager, you are required to be across very diverse topics. So when I was leading sustainability at Australia Post, in one day I might go from a meeting talking about gender and diversity issues to going to talk about plastic packaging, to going to the marketing team and talking with them about greenwashing, to influencing other parts of the business, including procurement and others. So it's very diverse, which means that you need to have very strong relationships across a very broad range of stakeholders within an organisation. So having those soft diplomacy skills and is really critical. Some people would say I'm more effective at that than others, but you do need to engage with a really broad range of stakeholders. and be able to communicate effectively and how to influence change. You also need to challenge the status quo. And so I think my background as a campaigner has sort of helped with that. I'm not afraid of speaking truth to power, and I think it's really important for sustainability professionals to agitate within an organisation, albeit respectfully and effectively. So that's a little bit about the role. As Ben shared, I was one of the first chief sustainability officers in Australia, but that doesn't mean there weren't other senior sustainability professionals before me. Sometimes they had different titles of directors or general managers. So I just make that observation as well. I think in Australia, there's probably about 10 to 15 chief sustainability officer positions at this point in time. I haven't counted it recently, but that was about a year ago I counted it. But there's a lot more other general managers and directors of sustainability. Over the past year, so I left Australia Post about a year ago, and I had the opportunity to travel for a little while, a little bit of a unofficial or unintended sabbatical, I suppose. And I spent some time in the Middle East and in Europe and North America, and more recently in Asia, and had the opportunity to speak at a number of sustainability conferences and meet my peers in different contexts. And so I just want to share some trends that I've observed with sustainability professionals globally. So the first is that, and I have to smile looking at this room, which for those of you online, there's probably 20 people in the room, and there's like maybe a bit more, and there's probably 4 or so, 5 men. The first observation is that as a discipline, it's very much dominated by females. Most of my peers from other parts of corporate Australia are female. I think that's reflective of a few things. I think first, it's reflective of and you may challenge me on things, and please, I welcome it, but reflective of a woman's natural ability to juggle, I think, is probably a fair thing to say. Juggle different disciplines simultaneously, different topics simultaneously. I think it's reflective of soft skills that is often something that women are known for in the workplace. I think it's also the fact that perhaps historically girls don't gravitate towards the STEM subjects at school and at university, and environmental sustainability obviously requires a lot of that. And I also think it's a little bit reflective, at least in the Australian context, of sustainability emerging as a new discipline, and in some instances, and many instances, being perceived by corporate leaders as a PR exercise, as an opportunity. So I think a lot of people come from comms and PR backgrounds, like for me in the very early stage of my career. So I'd make that sort of observation. It's very female heavy. As mentioned, I think there's probably 10 to 15 CSOs in the Australian market at this point in time. But you may be interested to note that I would say very few of them report to the actual CEO. So in the way that a chief risk officer may not necessarily report to the CEO, we're not seeing in the Australian market a lot of the CSOs reporting to the CEO. That may change. It may be a little bit different in the US. I'm not 100% sure it is, but these are sort of anecdotal observations that I've made.
Can I just ask you on that then? Can you sort of describe the interaction with the executive team? So as a CSO, are you involved in executive team meetings?
Yeah. So I think the way organisations configure sustainability differs in every organisation. The question was, I can hear it. look, if I reflect on my own career and my experience at Australia Post, it differed at different times. So when I was first appointed into the role of CSO, I wasn't even reporting to an executive. You know, you could pose the question, well, is that just another form of greenwashing? Is it just symbolism? I don't think so. Having the role of CSO at that stage several years ago created a lot of buzz in the organisation, and our CEO at that point in time was Christine Holgate, who some of you may be familiar with, and when she established the role and appointed me into it, she announced the results one day and invited me up onto the stage, and I didn't know this was going to happen. So it was one of the few times in the year when the whole organisation is gathered online and all the senior executives in the room. And she was talking about the importance of this role and how pleased she was to appoint me into it. And I think that the signal of the appointment was very helpful in me being able to influence change internally. People knew that I had the support of the CEO. People were excited about Australia Post being one of the very first organisations in the Australian context to appoint a CSO. So I think that was really helpful. In terms of my ability to engage with and my need to engage with other parts of the business, I think that again fluctuated over time. So I had pretty solid relationships with all of the executives. When you're looking at ESG in an organisation like Australia Post, some of the environmental, social and governance issues that you're working on are more relevant for some executives and some business units than for others. And so, you know, we set up cross-functional working groups on, for example, on environment and climate, and some of the other executives were in that, but not all of the executives were in that. We had cross-functional working groups on other issues as well at different times, and there was a different mix of stakeholders. There was a time in my experience where, you know, we had a sustainability committee of the board, and so my team and I were regularly developing papers to advise, educate and advise and seek guidance from the board on different sustainability issues. And we thought we were making really good progress. We actually had went from what I would say was sometimes a difficult relationship with the board to a very favourable relationship with the board over years, and with that influence and those opportunities to present. But after a while, I realised that actually not all of the other executives were privy to all of that information if they weren't at that meeting. And so while we'd made great progress with the board, then my team and I had to go back and bring more of the executives on the journey. And then in amongst all of that, there was a change of CEO, and then we had COVID, and then new CEOs, a new CEO and a new executive team coming in. So it is difficult when you're the person championing at a senior level sustainability within your organisation changes, and that for us happened very rapidly, as some may be familiar with, so that is a threat, and I guess that's a bit of corporate life though. Anyway, really, it can happen to anybody in any role. So one of the other things that I've observed from conversations with sustainability peers both here and abroad is people saying that it's just really difficult. It's really difficult to be in an organisation and to affect change around sustainability. And without naming names, I have in mind a sustainability colleague of mine who led a networking organisation, I'll put it here, domestically for a number of years. She was very connected to a lot of the sustainability peers. And then when she quit that job, she took on an in-house sustainability role. And I saw her not so long ago, and she was saying to me, it's really hard. And I laughed and I said, yeah, you know, like that's what a sustainability role is at this point in time in corporate life. It is really hard. Because, like I was sharing, you need to have positive and constructive relationships with a very broad range of stakeholders. So your time is spent very thin. You have to have a depth of expertise to be able to effectively influence that change. Like any manager, you need to have your own team and you know, the trust and positive relationships with your team and ensure you've got the right people in the right role. Then there's, you know, all of the other internal and external factors that come about as well. I think, you know, it's also made complicated because it's in many organisations until more recently, and this is changing in the Australian context, it's seen as, historically seen as a nice to have or something that's about values. It's not core to business necessarily. That is shifting, and I really welcome the Australian government's mandatory reporting obligations that are coming in with respect to climate and other matters but I think that puts an unfair amount of pressure on sustainability professionals. I've had many conversations with people that have led sustainability in organisations where they've said that they'll do it once or they'll do it twice, but they don't have it in them to go to a third company and start from scratch and evolve the change holistically again. Yeah, please.
I wonder if what you're saying resonates so much with this UN Women's study last year about folks who get the responsibility for gender mainstreaming.
Yeah.
And how that's often piled on as an additional responsibility to their existing work, and that they don't get as much, as you said, the connection to leadership, whether that's the board or the CEO is not often there, and yet they're given this responsibility for a serious overhaul, and it doesn't always push through, and as you said, very female dominated, as a lot of gender mainstreaming is. And it seems that some of these DEI, diversity, equality, inclusion roles are also facing that similar thing. Do you think there's, you know, resonance there, and do you think that's something that, you know, would be helpful to have a conversation for professionals in those spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a new discipline, right? So it's like people are not and I'll touch on this further, but people are not educated at business school necessarily, and historically, and serving their careers throughout an organisation with this in mind. They sort of learn about it later, right? And so it's sort of one of those things where it's like, give it to that person, you know, it's a little pet project, give it to them to sort of look after. And I have the opportunity to speak at a lot of sustainability conferences, as I mentioned, but I'm thinking of the ones in Australia, and each year there's so many more people that come to these conferences year after year. They're just like bulging. And I'll see somebody, I'll see the tag and the name of their organisation, think, oh, I haven't thought of that organisation in relation to sustainability before, heard about them before. And they'll be like, yeah, I'm coming to the conference to learn about sustainability because it's, you know, I've been asked to take this on in addition to my existing remit. And so I think that's part of it. Yeah. But, you know, change has to start somewhere. So yes, I do think it's difficult. And as I said, it's sometimes unfair on sustainability professionals, and I see that taking a real toll on peers, and I'm concerned about that moving forward. That said, the wave of mandatory due diligence and disclosure requirements that's coming globally, and that maybe will create a shift and see companies recognise that they need to do this. It's no longer a nice to have. And so I think that we're going through that phase at the moment. You know, for example, even in the Australian context, and I'll just refer to a document from one of my peers, but you know, in recent months, we've looked at the mandatory disclosure of climate-related financial risks in Australia, as I mentioned, the gender pay gap transparency reporting, which is prompting greater scrutiny around that in the workplace, the modern slavery reforms. Then there's voluntary ESG frameworks that may become mandatory in the near future, including the nature-related financial disclosures, and that's very much mirroring what was the TCFD, the Australian Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, you know, they say is commencing with climate. It's not just about climate. You know, then you look abroad, and if your organisation has operations that connect with Europe, then you need to be across things like the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the CSDDD, which is going to have huge ramifications for businesses in Europe. So I would say,
Just a small question. Is there an Australian taxonomy for ESG, or are we drawing on the European ESG taxonomy?
so the Australian approach is to start with climate, and we'll see at the time. But I mean, look, to be fair, in the Australian context, we have got the modern slavery statement, the reporting. We do have you know, reforms in relation to gender and other diversity matters, and have mandatory reporting for some organisations in the Australian context for some time. So it's a little bit of a patchwork approach in Australia. You know, it will hopefully become more holistic. But I think this wave of legislative changes that are happening here and abroad is certainly another trend. And I think that has implications for the earlier topic that I was saying, is with, you know, sustainability being seen on the side. It'll bring it more to the fore, and hopefully reduce pressure on sustainability professionals over time. Yes.
Yeah, if I can take off from your slide, planet over profit.
Yeah.
What would you say to those scholars and activists that basically say at the end of the day, the problem is capitalism? That you can't tweak it, that you need to transcend it. And I happen to be one of those scholars because I did a book published in 2012, Global Capitalism and Climate Change, the Need for an Alternative System, which went through a second edition, I think, in 2022. So there are a whole lot of people saying that it's greenwash. I know you said it's not greenwash, but there's a whole lot of people that are saying it's greenwash. People like Christopher Nye in the Sydney Business School did a book with a colleague on corporate environmentalism. So as there's this consciousness about the environmental problem and the climate problem, corporations that have for years, decades denied it in the form of things like the Global Climate Coalition that went out of existence, now they're saying, oh, we better say something about this. So anyway, I don't know how you respond to that kind of charge.
Yeah, so my comment about it's not greenwashing was the appointment of a chief sustainability officer. I do see in the Australian context real change coming about in some companies. When I went overseas, I felt like some of it was a bit more token, depending on the region that I was in. I have a lot of respect for the academic line of thought that you've put forward, and do see a lot of problems with the capitalist system, full stop. In addition, I see a lot of problems with the democratic system and some of the issues that we're seeing globally as well. That's my personal view, perhaps not reflective of the organisations I'm associated with. But I do think we need transformative change, not just within organisations, but across systems that govern every facet of society. So I have a lot of respect for that, personally. What I wanted to also say in relation to the mandatory reporting is that I wonder, and I'm a little bit afraid, that it's going to have unintended consequences of sustainability being less, as I was talking about the spectrum at the beginning. So, you know, risk and compliance at one end of the corporate sustainability spectrum and value creation at the other end. I'm nervous about sustainability being not transformative and being moved to just a reporting and compliance obligations. I think probably when I was appointed into the CSO role about 4 or 5 years ago, I would have thought that by now there would be a lot more chief sustainability officers in Australia and a lot more senior sustainability roles. I'm not saying that domestically, which perhaps is speaking to your point a little bit. But I am nervous that sustainability roles are going to just be managed at that middle level with enough teams to be able to do the reporting annually, and not the focus on the transformative change that is required of the companies and required of the systems. So that makes me a bit nervous. And I'm particularly nervous about that in the Australian context. And so one of the things that I heard about when I was in the US was the advent of a new role called an ESG controller. And it's mirroring the role of a financial controller and reports to the CFO and is responsible for the data governance, being across the compliance and the frameworks, playing that role as a conduit within the organisation across different teams, using the established financial data collection and reporting rhythm within an organisation to collect environmental and social data as well. I really like the idea of that ESG controller role, and I think it would have been very helpful where I've worked in the past. Although that said, at Post, our financial controller was totally across the ESG and very supportive of his team members doing it too. So it takes different forms. What I'm beginning to see in the Australian context, in light of this mandatory reporting on climate that's coming in, is environment teams being moved into the finance area, like completely. And that makes me nervous because of traditional reporting lines within an organisation and how KPIs are set. A sustainability professional needs to agitate for change and needs to be able to put forward alternative business cases and to drive that change and play that devil's advocate and be that internal campaigner. I'm nervous that CFOs will set for their environmental team members targets that are around cost cutting and not around investing to create the holistic change over time. I may be wrong. It may not take that turn, or that may take a little turn for a little while and then sweep back around. But that's what I'm a bit nervous about at the moment, as an unintended consequence of the reporting regime that's coming in. You had a question?
Yeah. From your perspective, you spoke a bit about transformative change. And there's lots of different literatures about what makes a change transformative. It's not like a test on those, but I'd just be curious what your definition of.
What it's not around just reporting and compliance. It's not around tinking around the edges. It's around reimagining an organisation in a way that has less adverse impact on the environment and on society, whether that includes stop making certain products, stop engaging in certain services, and creating new forms instead to replace it. It's the preparedness to say no and to stop doing something and to do things differently. I haven't read the academic literature around it, so
Yeah, no.
like that as well. Yeah.
So just you mentioned how like environment teams are kind of moving into the financial divisions. So with a potential fear of like environmental teams and companies or sustainability roles kind of being erased, what would your ideal, I guess, organizational structure look like, where it involves both the transformative change groups, but also the financial reporting groups? Like, what would the ideal structure be?
I wouldn't say necessarily sustainability teams are going to be erased. A good analogy, I think, of sustainability in the corporate space is how companies have approached safety over the years. So safety in a workplace, and I'm not even talking about mental health and wellbeing, but I'm talking about safety, 50 years ago was viewed more radically, and now it's a given, and most companies will say safety is our number one priority. And so I think that those academics in the room, or those of you that want to do some research pieces, I think that might be a really good comparison to look at, and to look at how safety has become embedded in organisations and whether there's lessons of that for environmental sustainability in particular. I think this sort of jumps to the next section where I was going to talk about ideas for that change, but I think it's really critical in a corporate for to have KPIs around the ESG for executive, middle manager, and for that to be distilled throughout the organisation. I think you need to have cross-functional working groups that are really tasked with reinforcing one another's respective priorities, and executives needing to do that as well. I think there are ways, like and you need to have more dotted lines, I think, as well. If we are going to have general managers for sustainability or chief sustainability officers, they need to be able to be across the different areas of the organisation and to manage the strategy holistically. So that just sort of leads me to the last section, and then we'll have I'll hand over to you all. Ideas for accelerating transformative change. So I believe very, very strongly in the importance of education as a foundation for creating change within a corporate workplace. I think as a shared for a lot of sustainability professionals, it's really unfair for them to be the individuals that are educating and everything beyond that. Like they're spending a lot of time educating their peers, whether it's in procurement, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in sales, whether it's in finance, educating them on the 101s of sustainability that I actually think that everybody should be leaving university with an understanding about. So I think that that's true of all disciplines, not just business disciplines as well. And so I think, whether you're studying medicine or whether you're doing product design or whether it's human resources and organisational, change, and business schools as a given, I think that there is a really important role for universities to ensure that everybody graduates from their undergraduate program and also from postgraduate programs with a depth of understanding around these fundamentals. And I would also add to that, coming back to sort of the democracy point I was making before, just as an aside, I've also been outraged since I was young that we live in a society that has compulsory voting, but most Australians, or I'm not sure if it's statistically correct to say most, but many Australians don't understand the importance of voting or the difference between the political parties that we have. So I think there's a really important role for education in relation to those matters. I think, as I alluded, or as I touched on before, it's really critical to view sustainability in an organisation holistically and across that spectrum that I was talking about. It's not beginning and ending with compliance and reporting. It's got to be seen as transformative and a way to create new forms of value for an organisation. And the other thing that I would say that maybe a little bit easier for you all, but equally challenging, is to step out of your own comfort zones and your professional bubbles. So in the past four months or so, I've, for example, have been working part-time at a law firm. I don't have a legal background. I never thought I'd work for a law firm. And, there's been times in my corporate life where the legal teams haven't necessarily been my favourite teams. But it's been terrific to work where I've been working in recent months and to hear the legal professions talking about environmental and social sustainability from their perspective and how they too are trying to influence change but using a different set of tools. Again, the importance of cross-pollination across different disciplines and different industries is the only way we're going to be able to solve these significant environmental and social issues before us. So that were just my remarks. Sorry, I spoke a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I'm opening it up.
Apologise, we'd be very happy to hear much more from you.
Okay, well, their initial thoughts, happy for you to challenge me on anything.
Let's just first go over
So I'll
to.
just check and see if there's anything. Maybe take
Yeah,
one from the room
okay.
while I check.
Hands up.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got a million, right, please.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a lecturer in computing and information systems. I'm really passionate about educating our students in the way you're talking about. I was wondering if you have any further specifics that, you know, the 101 is part of it, and in the world of IT, there are probably additional things they should be grasping. Do you have any further points to make about, you know, takeaways for me, things to include in our curriculum for our students?
Well, I mean, for me, when I think about IT, two key sustainability topics are at the forefront of my mind. One is about renewable electricity. IT doesn't function without electricity. So the importance of teaching people about the sources of energy and the different streams that are available and the transformation that needs to happen. So I think that that's very relevant to IT. The other I would point to is the issue of modern slavery and the core components that go into the hardware that you create to be able to do your job. I think that they're two of the most material issues from an IT perspective. Yeah.
I'll just mention, so the university, we have our own sustainability plan and we have teaching targets. And one of them is that every graduate should have beyond a basic threshold understanding of sustainability as applies to their sort of discipline. But then we also have the ACE strategy, the Advancing Students in Education strategy, which sort of has just come much more recently, which has sustainability as a touchstone. But that hasn't been sort of articulated much at all, right? So there are some building blocks that can be built upon, right? But it then requires people to actually sort of take the reins and build upon them. Theo, how are we going for online?
We do have two questions.
Let's go with one of them.
So the first one's from David Lind, who asks, relating to the legal side of ESG that you brought up, Susan, and noting the recent $11.3 million greenwashing penalty against Mercer, do you have any observations and or commentary on the recent federal court greenwashing cases and what they signal for future greenwashing requirements from companies?
Yes and no. So again, I'm not a lawyer. I think that these cases are really interesting. I think that the ACCC guidance that came out last year for companies in relation to greenwashing is really important for sustainability professionals to be across. As I shared before, am on the board of the UN Global Compact Network Australia, and we were eager last year to develop a partnership with a communications entity called Salter Baxter and Kahoot to create a bespoke greenwashing course to not just provide. I was originally seeing it as something that would provide training for marketing and comms professionals within a corporate, but actually they've been telling me that some of the general counsels of companies have been coming to this workshop and sustainability managers as well. I think there's a lot that's out there to be able to upskill in relation to that space. I'm really happy to see cases, come before the court and fines being put into place. Mercer's an example. I think more of it needs to happen, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of false advertising, a lot of spectrums as well, and I wonder if the focus on the environment is a bit biased in some way as well. I think it's needed because you need to give consumers a certain level of confidence about this new discipline. But I hope it doesn't become again one of these situations where we're spending more time and energy on compliance than on really focusing on the change and education.
And we're organising an event, I think it was David, you said, on greenwashing late in October. We'll have an issue.
There were some other questions, please.
I'm Erica. I have two questions actually. The first one, you mentioned some drivers, mainly mandatory climate reportings. I wonder how you see voluntary international initiatives like SBTI, for example, in this. And my second question is about the best communication approach as a sustainability professional. We will need to talk with different people, including those that do not believe in climate change or that do not want to be educated in this topic. How do you think is the best way to approach what those people like in leadership positions would be moved to do something even though they do not believe or do not want to?
So in relation to voluntary standards, I think there's a role for voluntary frameworks. But when you look at the past 20, 30 years of voluntary sustainability frameworks, they haven't been successful enough in bringing about the change that's needed. And so I do welcome the mandatory changes or legislation that's coming in and reporting and so forth. I'm not opposed to that, but we need to try everything, basically. I think I personally am nervous about organisations that are committing to net zero that are not taking a science-based target endorsed approach. I know there's been a lot of controversy within that organisation about whether or not, for example, the organisation will accept carbon offsetting as a credible means to reduce emissions, which has culminated, it was a big internal battle within that organisation, which recently culminated in the CEO losing or resigning from his position. I think addressing scope 3 is a real issue for companies, and CEOs are very nervous about it, and very nervous about the short timeline that they see to be able to bring about the change. Frankly, it wouldn't be a short timeline if people had actually taken this seriously 20 years ago, but we are where we are now. I think, again, we have a really important role. There's a really important role for lawyers to work in strengthening legal contracts between an organisation and its suppliers, for example. But we can't just be really requiring small businesses, often small business suppliers, to wave a magic wand and completely change everything they're doing. And there are cost implications for some businesses, although I think there's the cost of not acting as well, right? So yes, I mean, I'm supportive of SBTI framework in particular, and I do think that the CSDDD, for example, in Europe, is requiring companies to have publish their transition pathways and to align that with the Paris Agreement. And frankly, the SBTI is the most credible way to demonstrate that a company is doing it at this point in time. So that's where we're at. There may be other frameworks that come up, but one of the things I welcome in recent years has been a consolidation of sustainability reporting frameworks, though, as well. So I think that trend needs to continue, because otherwise we just play institutions and frameworks off one another, and it just becomes another reason for inaction.
So can I just say this topic is relevant for the university because we have gone down the climate active pathway, which is the government approved heavy offsetting pathway, not the SBTI pathway. And there will be a review later next year on how we're going with our climate targets. And I would suggest that one of the consideration should be that we adopt the SBTI pathway. So, if there are opportunities to contribute to that conversation, I encourage.
Yeah, I mean, climate active itself is before various legal cases, but I would say is one of the more credible government approaches to offsetting than other countries, right? And so yes, we live in not a perfect society. And the other question was about how to influence
Yeah.
and
People that do not believe in climate change
Yeah.
or do not want to be about this.
I think this is where the role of sustainability professionals, where they really need to be tenacious, where you just can't give up and you have to try every tool in the toolbox. And I've had situations before where I've had international experts come and give presentations to, I won't name who, but a very senior leader of an organisation that I was involved in before. I was thinking this was a way to capacity build them, that they would have a more holistic understanding about climate change and the role of human behaviour in accelerating it. And that person instead, at the end of the session, sort of leant back in his chair and said, well, I don't believe in the science of climate change. So, you know, I mean, there's only so far you can take a duck to the water, right? So I think there are a lot of really interesting tools that are out there for sustainability professionals these days to educate. So AXA Climate, for example, is a platform that provides 101 training around sustainability that that organisations can subscribe to. And they've actually done a really good job because there's all these different modules that talk about, you know, biodiversity and water and climate and so forth. But there's also a version of their information where there's modules that are like, I'm in the finance team, or I'm in the human resources team, or I'm in the information technology team, and it's designed for those professionals within an organisation. And I've just been privy to access it for a short time at the moment. I think it's really credible, and definitely see a place for it in educating people within an organisation already. In terms of those that are not necessarily within an organisation, or you know, there's a lot of short courses that do exist now. You know, I'm sure the University of Melbourne offers a lot. There's also LinkedIn Learning is a good platform to be able to learn about these things. And I think a lot of industry associations are recognising the need to better educate their people about ESG issues too. So sometimes your industry body has some good training modules. And of course, I cannot neglect to add the UN Global Compact. So if your organisation is a member of the UN Global Compact, it means anybody in the organisation can access their online training modules, which are extensive. So that's another option too. Please.
Swan, thank you so much for your remarks so far. I'd love to ask a question from a systems thinking point of view.
Yeah.
And what do you think, or just your general thoughts on the role and responsibilities of the CSO outside of the organization, whether it's peers, non-peers, government, NGOs, that kind of way? What are their responsibilities? What should the role be?
Yeah, I mean, there's a risk at just thinking it's all so big, you know, and just being impossible and then not being able to affect change, right? And so I encourage people to be able to educate themselves and create change within their sphere of influence. You know, I established about 7 years ago with an external colleague of mine, Marty Oaten, a network for sustainability professionals, and we come together every couple of months and have a nice dinner and a couple of glasses of wine and vent, but also exchange information, exchange tips. So I think that you need to have a really strong support network around you of, you know, obviously friends and families or peers, because we can all learn from one another. Again, it's a new discipline, so we need to learn from one another about how we can influence change within whichever system, whether it's in that organisational system or the broader system. I think there's a role for different organisations to lobby governments and you know, unfortunately, those that are better financed tend to be more vocal in that space, which may not necessarily lead to the outcomes that we want. But I do think, you know, as I said, there's a lot of legislation that's coming that's coming here and abroad at the moment, and I do think that will lead to positive change, but I think it might be, you know, a matter of one step forward, maybe 2 steps, 3 steps back, and then forward again. I mean, the reality at the end of the day is that these issues are not going to go away, right? So it doesn't matter how loudly a finance team says they don't have budget for it. The reality is, if we don't create the change now and set the foundations now for an organisation to operate differently, it's going to become more expensive later on, or it's going to have cost implications in terms of the health and well-being of the workforce, or their, you know, customers no longer buying their products. So it's not going to go away.
Let's have a question online.
Yeah, there's one from Francesca, which is, from your experience, are CSOs consulted in business and corporate strategy conversations, and to what extent, when and how is their input integrated?
Yeah.
Great question.
So I guess that's an example of transformative change, right? Like if an organisation is not embedding sustainability in its entire business strategy, then there's room for improvement. And I have worked in organisations where that hasn't necessarily been the case, or it's been involved in enterprise strategy for some of the dimensions, like the diversity perspective, or, you know, the safety aspect of the S, but not necessarily the environmental perspective. I think that's changing. I think you're seeing sustainability people and strategy teams having a closer relationship. I think that strategy area is probably one of the areas that there are people that are understanding the holistic nature, but I think it needs to happen more too. We're also seeing a lot of sustainability professionals don't necessarily, a lot of what I'm seeing also is a lot of strategy people moving into sustainability. Like, you're seeing a lot of comms and marketing people moving into sustainability. Again, it's a new discipline, so this will continue to happen. Yeah, I'm saying that. I'm not going to make a judgment about it, but yeah, I guess it comes down to individual level.
Hi Susan, how you going? I guess I wanted to ask you a question around the journey, I guess, that people are taking, organisations, from a ESG sustainability perspective. Like, as you mentioned, it's new, but then also some organisations have been doing this for quite a while, and some are actually going backwards. Like, for instance, Air New Zealand, who have dropped their 2030 targets, and then they've dropped the SBTI as well, you know, in the aviation space. And then you got other organisations, like, for instance, they might advertise for a global sustainability manager, gives you kind of responsibilities, accountability similar to yours at Australia Post, and then says 3 years experience. So, you know, which obviously is a bit comical, but so, you know, there's such a variety of people on the journey, or organisations on the journey, but where to next in terms of the horizon from a net zero perspective? So, because some organisations are already there, so what would be the next mountain, I guess, to climb, you know, from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, companies, I would argue that companies are not necessarily there with the net zero yet, because, I mean, they might be setting the targets, they might have that in place, and they might have the pathway map, but they're still going to have their scope 3 emissions from their suppliers, and clearly most companies are nowhere near where they need to be. I think you're right. We're at a period of time where different companies, there's a different level of sophistication and understanding in organisations around sustainability. And again, it's because it's a new discipline, and again, it's because it hasn't been mandated in the past. And so you're seeing different levels of maturity, you're seeing different levels of boldness from executive teams and CEOs and boards. I think one of the things that I didn't touch on, but probably should, is that, you know, I did the AICD Company Directors course last year, the Australian Institute of Company Directors, which is the body that sort of it provides a certification for, or a qualification for people that want to be on boards. And I was pleasantly surprised to see more ESG content in that. And so I think boards are recognising that they have a director's duty with respect to these matters that they didn't necessarily fully grasp in the past. And you are seeing you know, potential legal challenges at that level as well, about the importance of the board driving change within the organisation. So yes, I think until things are, you know, until we start to see, for example, the CSDDD, like that's just been a point that launched, but it's still going to be 5 years until all of the companies that fall under that threshold need to adopt all the elements of it, right? So the change is still far too slow. And it does require courage within an organisation, and it starts at universities with people being educated about the importance of driving these changes.
Where would a company go to next if they were, say we're in 2030 instead of 2024, right? And they've achieved net zero. Where to next after that? Like their board says, okay, what's the next you know, horizon, or what's the next thing that we can, you know, market using or promote using a you know, maybe that type of term, you know, in terms of going that next level?
Well, I think the emphasis over the past 10, 15 years and still now is really on climate. In the Australian context since 2019, on the social dimension, there's been more of an emphasis on slavery, which is great. But I do think, as I mentioned, one of the areas that is starting to evolve is around the Task Force for Nature-related financial disclosures, so biodiversity and understanding the biodiversity impacts of your organisation, which every organisation has an impact and is affected from in relation to biodiversity. So I think it's going to be that new thing that requires people within organisations to think differently about their products and their supply chain. I feel very strongly that pretty much all sustainability solutions are found in the supply chain. So the importance of procurement people to be educated on ESG matters is really important. But you know, in the absence of that happening as holistically as we would like to see, again, it's up to boards and executives and sustainability teams to try to embed it within the organisation through cross-functional efforts, KPIs, upskilling. And I would also point organisations that want to continue to evolve in relation to ESG matters to refer to bodies like the UN Global Compact, because they are the body that is officially mandated by the UN to work with the business sector on sustainability. So they have abundant resources and white papers and training modules, etc., as I mentioned before. So they're a really good resource to refer to.
Good. Now, very
that's good. Yeah, so we'll shift from emissions into more biodiversity and that holistic kind of circular economy type principles and
circularity also, of course,
Yeah.
is one. Yeah, the harmony of or the crossover of biodiversity and circularity is going to have a lot more attention in the years to come. I think we've run out of time.
Yes, so unfortunately, obviously, we want to just keep asking Susan questions because it's been so valuable to us all. So please, everybody here and at home, thanks, Susan.